I've worked security at Harmon Valley Medical for 11 years. Nights, mostly. You see enough in this job that after a while the world stops surprising you. The overdoses, the domestic calls, the old men who come in alone at 2 in the morning and don't have anyone to call. I thought I'd seen the shape of every story this building had to tell. Then a November rainstorm brought in a man named Danny Rowe, and I learned I hadn't seen anything yet. He came in by ambulance at 9:15. Multiple fractures, a construction accident outside the city, scaffold collapse, bad luck compounded by bad weather. The paramedics had him stabilized, but he was running a fever and in and out of consciousness, and the triage team moved fast. I was walking my corridor round when they wheeled him through the double doors, and I held them open out of habit. He was younger than I expected. Mid-30s, lean, with the kind of stillness even an unconscious man can carry when he spent years training his body to go quiet under pressure. I noticed the small anchor tattoo on his right forearm and thought, military. You learn to read that in this work. The bay they put him in was Claire's. Claire Merritt had been at Harmon Valley for about 8 months. She was 31, quiet, the kind of nurse who did her job without theater. She had dark hair she kept pinned back, steady hands, and a habit of arriving 12 minutes early for every shift. The attending on that night was Dr. Callum Prest, new to the hospital, still sharpening his edges. And he had the manner some young doctors carry, the kind where they're always half talking to the room and only incidentally to the person beside them. When Claire pointed out that Rose's blood pressure had ticked down in transit, and she wanted a second line placed before they moved to imaging, Prest nodded without looking at her and said they'd reassess after the films. She didn't argue. She set up the second line herself, quietly, while he was reviewing the intake form. I noticed the way you notice things from a hallway. 11 years teaches you the difference between a nurse who's been overlooked and a nurse who doesn't need the room's attention to do what she came to do. Claire was the second kind. Rowe was drifting when they got him settled. Fever talk, mostly, fragments, half sentences. The monitors were steady. Claire was checking his dressing when he surfaced, eyes opening slow, focusing on the ceiling first and then on her face. I watched it happen from the doorway. The change was small, but it was real. His breathing shifted, shallower, then more deliberate. His eyes moved from her face to her left forearm, where her sleeve had ridden up past the elbow. There was a scar there, not large. Clean diagonal line just below the crease, faded silver with age. He stared at it the way a man stares at something he has been carrying in his memory for years and suddenly finds in front of him. His right hand came up and he caught her wrist. Not hard, careful, like he was afraid she might dissolve. Compass, he said. It was barely a word, rough and stripped down, the way voices get when the body has used up everything else. But Claire heard it. Her hands went still on the dressing. She looked at his face for a long moment. Easy, she said. You're at Harmon Valley. You're safe. Her voice was level. But I saw her look at his right forearm, the tattoo, and I saw her close her eyes for just a second. Prest looked up from his chart. He's confused, he said. Fever presentation, let's get those films. Claire didn't answer him. She leaned in close to Rowe and said, quietly and precisely, 3rd Platoon, Kunar Province. The ridge at Deregao, November 7 years ago. She said it like a key fitting a lock. Rowe's grip on her wrist tightened. His eyes cleared. I've been looking for you, he said. I stepped into the doorway without quite deciding to set his clipboard down. Miss Merritt, he said with a small correction in his voice, the kind that means, stay in your lane. Claire straightened up and looked at him. He's not delirious, she said. He recognizes me. She said it without heat, without apology, without any particular interest in whether Prest believed her. Then she turned back to Rowe and told him to rest, that they were going to take care of him, that he was going to be fine. He didn't let go of her wrist for another full minute. What she told me later, in pieces, over the weeks that followed, was this: 7 years before, she had been a combat medic attached to a small element holding a ridgeline in Kunar Province during a 12-hour engagement. The aid station was 2 men and a trauma bag. 3 operators were wounded. Her partner took a round early in the fight, and Claire held the station alone from mid-morning until the QRF reached them near dark. She kept all 3 men alive. One of them, the one with the worst of it, a chest wound that should have killed him, was a young sergeant named Danny Rowe. She had not seen him since the medevac lifted out. The Army gave her a commendation she never mentioned to anyone at Harmon Valley. It was in her file, behind her nursing credentials, folded into an envelope. She had not unfolded it in years. The scar on her forearm she'd gotten in the last hour of that fight, a fragment she'd never had properly looked at, because there was no time. Rowe had spent 7 years trying to find the name of the medic who held that ridge for him. I stood in that hallway and turned all of this over slowly, the way you do when something reshapes the ground you're standing on. I had walked past Claire Merritt 100 times. I had seen press talk over her twice in one shift. I had watched her set up a second line nobody asked for and say nothing about it, and I had thought, good nurse, quiet. I had not thought to look any further than that. There are things you carry about yourself that nobody in the building knows, and sometimes those things are larger than the building. The 4 men arrived at 10:47. I was at the front desk when they came through the main doors. Civilian clothes, wet from the rain, moving with the deliberate quiet of men who know how to enter a space without announcing themselves. The one in front was maybe 40, through the shoulders, a beard going gray at the jaw. Behind him, 3 others, one pushing himself in a wheelchair, folded flag visible in his lap. They stopped at the desk and the man in front said, simply, "We're here for Claire Merritt." I asked who they were. "Friends," he said. "Old ones." I called back to the bay. Claire came out to the corridor still in her scrubs, her badge pinned straight, hair still pinned back. She stopped when she saw them. The man in front, I learned later his name was Marcus Webb, that he had been the Elements team sergeant that November in Kunar, took one step forward and said her name, not Merritt, the other name, Compass, and something crossed her face that I can only describe as a person setting down a weight they'd grown so used to carrying, they'd forgotten it was heavy. Webb turned to the other 3 men. They formed a line in the corridor, 4 of them, the last one rolling himself into position beside the others. Under the fluorescent lights of a trauma center hallway on a rainy November night. Then, together they came to attention. They saluted her. Not a quick gesture. The full thing, back straight, chins level, eyes forward, hands held until she acknowledged. The man in the wheelchair had one arm in a sling, and he raised the other. Prest had followed Claire into the corridor. He stood 3 steps behind her, and I watched the expression on his face change as he looked at the line of men, then at Claire, then at the line of men again. He did not say anything. Claire looked at each of them for a long moment, then she raised her right hand and returned it. I've been in this building 11 years. I've walked through its crises, its grief, its small daily acts of care that nobody writes down. I have a 30-year-old bad knee from my time as an MP, and a skeptic's regard for ceremony that I came by honestly. I am not a man who is moved easily. I stood in that corridor and I could not find my voice. What I know is this. She had been there every night for 8 months. She had been quiet and certain and thorough, and the building had looked past her the way buildings do. And the men who were with her on the ridge when it mattered, the men who knew exactly what she had done and exactly what it had cost her, had traveled through a rainstorm on a Tuesday night to stand in a hallway and say so. Some debts are too large for paperwork. Some things only a salute will cover. I thought about that for a long time after I drove home that night. I thought about it in the silence of my truck, with the rain on the windshield, the highway empty, about the things people carry that no one around them can see, about how long she had been here, and how little we had known. When I came back in the next morning and Claire was already there, 12 minutes early, as always, badge pinned straight. I held the door for her, the way you hold a door for someone you have finally understood. She nodded and walked through it, back to work, still the same. That was always the thing about her. She never needed us to know, she just needed to do her job.